Lekut Sichis Chelek Chavches Behaalosecha Aleph Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Binyamin ben Menashe Kaltman. Parshas Behaalosecha begins with the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. We find this mitzvah mentioned in other places in Torah as well. What is the unique significance of the parsha in Behaalosecha, and what can we learn from it? Let us begin. The beginning of the parsha, Noch di Psukim, Behaalosecha es haneros, El mul pnei ha-menorah ye'iru shivas haneros, when you raise up the candles or light the candles, they should face the menorah, they should face the as we'll see, the center of the menorah. Und vayas kein Aaron, El mul pnei ha-menorah ha'el haneros, and Aaron did so, that he lit the candles facing the menorah. Steht in Pasuk, the Pasuk then says, V'zeh ma'aseh ha-menorah, this is how the menorah is made, how it's constructed. Miksha zahav, it is hammered out of gold. Ad yirecha, ad pircha, till its base, till its flower. Mikshahi, it is hammered or chiseled. Kamara asher hera Hashem es Moshe, as the image which Hashem showed Moshe. Kein asa es ha-menorah, that's exactly how he made the menorah. So you have the pasuk in which Aaron is told to light the menorah and how to light the menorah. And then it says that this menorah that we're talking about was made out of miksha, it was made chiseled out of gold. So do of us beforschen fragen. In the erste Psukim von der Parsha, redt doch wegen dem Zivui zu Aaron, wie says der sein die Hadlokas haneros. In the first couple of Psukim, it's telling Aaron how to do the kindling of the lamps. As el mul pnei ha-menorah yi'iru shivas haneros, that the candles have to face the menorah. Wegen dem Öfen von Ma'aseh ha-menorah hat sich geredet das auch früher in Parshas Terumah. How to construct the menorah was already discussed previously in Parshas Terumah. Was is the shaychus von Pasuk v'zeh Ma'aseh ha-menorah to the Parsha Torah? So the question is a very simple question. If we're talking about kindling the menorah, and Aaron is being told the details how to kindle the menorah, I understand. But how to construct the menorah, we were already told about that way a long time ago. Why bring it up again here? And since this is a question that's related to the pshat, that there seems to be an extra pasuk here that doesn't fit in, is in verstandig. So it's not understood. Why does Rashi not address it in his pirush? Why does Rashi not explain to us why the pasuk v'zeh ma'aseh ha-menorah mikshazav is brought here and what it's telling us? The Rebbe is going to bring two suggested answers by two Mefarshim, and the Rebbe is going to refute and say how those answers don't work according to Pshuto Shel Mikra. In other words, as we just learned in the last paragraph, in a big part, this question is on Rashi. Why does Rashi not address it? And therefore, we have to figure out what Rashi already told us, or what we know already, that would explain to us why Rashi doesn't address it. So this has to fit into Pshat. So in Siv Beis, the Rebbe is going to bring a Ramban and an Erachaim and say why those answers don't work according to Rashi. The Ramban is mevair as the Tama Kosov v'zeh ma'aseh ha-menorah is lirmeis shetzarich l'deireh shetiya miksha ki hu ma'akev ba. The Ramban says that the chiddush of this pasuk is that the din of miksha, the din that the menorah has to be hammered out of one chunk of gold, is a din that applies to future generations. That it is a necessary requirement that even if, let's say, the menorah breaks or they have to replace it, it has to be miksha. But this does not answer our question according to Rashi. In Parshas Terumah or in Parshas Emer. This din itself is part of that question. This fact that miksha is applicable in generations to come and that it is a necessary requirement at all times should have also been included earlier where the making of the menorah is discussed, either in Parshas Terumah or in Parshas Emer, as we'll see later in the Sicha, that Parshas Emer is one of the places where the mitzvah of menorah is discussed. So to say that the chiddush of this pasuk is that it's l'deiros doesn't answer the question, because according to Pshat, that's a detail in the construction of the menorah that also belongs to be discussed earlier and not here in Behaalosecha. The Erachaim is masbir as the pasuk kumbavar and natos and pirush aksuvim. The Erachaim is a very interesting explanation. He says that dafki in Behaalosecha there is a mistake, that there is a reason that a mistake might arise, and therefore here it have to be told miksha. What does he mean? Since the term for kindling here is Behaalosecha, which means to raise up. When Dosman Lepirushe, the Erechaim explains why does it say the word Behaalosecha and not the word of Hadlaka or something like that. So the Erechaim explains, as the Neder said in Nit Kvuim and Dikana Yamanera, the lamps, which means the part of the menorah in which you would put the oil and the wicks, were not affixed to the menorah; they were removable. The flex it up in them, and you take it down, and then clean it out and fill it up with oil. When the and then they would lift it up back onto the menorah, and that's why you use the word Behaalosecha, because when you prepared the menorah, you would lift up the ner, you would lift up the candle onto the menorah. Says the Erechaim that since the word Behaalosecha is telling us that the nadis, the actual candle part of the menorah, was not connected, so this would lead me to think as the same thing applies to the other parts of the menorah. As nachdem wie die menorah is gemacht geworden, that after once the menorah has been constructed, is the talking chivas is ozai miksha. After that point, there's no more obligation, no more requirement for it to be hammered from one piece. When das was the fact that the pasuk tells us that the menorah has to be miksha, hammered from one piece, is only the first time it's being made. But after once the menorah was constructed, he could do as he wishes, including making it of separate parts. Therefore, the pasuk Mesa says the Erechaim. This is why the pasuk has to tell us the Ma'isa Menorah Miksha v'Geimer, that the menorah has to be Miksha, as the din Miksha is expected, that this din that it has to be hammered from one piece, it applies later. In other words, according to the Erechaim, once you say the word Behaalosecha, this could mislead you to the wrong pshat and to the wrong din, to the wrong law, and therefore we have to clarify once again Miksha. That's what the Erechaim says. Why is it saying it miksha over here? It doesn't belong here. Because since he said the word Behaalosecha, which reminded the learner, the reader, that the neiros are separate parts, so you would think maybe other parts can also be separated or separate. Says the Rebbe Mechena Bar Zayin Mazon L'Pirish Rashi. We can't say that this is the explanation according to Rashi. Varum. It's possible that Rashi would agree that the neiros were not one piece with the menorah. And it's possible that, like the Erechaim said, that every time the menorah was prepared for kindling, it was done in a way that the neiros, the lamps, were taken down and then put back up. That's not the disagreement. Rashi might agree with the Erechaim that that's how it was done. Nevertheless, Rashi still can't say that that's why it says miksha for two reasons. Is aber neis was psutische mikra is aus in psutische mikra is schwer zu sagen as der fun was die nede sind gewen besonder was jeden tag meile gewen auf der menede so man uplearn of dem ganzen menede. First of all, according to pshat, it's very difficult to say that one would think that because the nedes were separate, therefore everything else can also be separate parts. In Parshas Teruma is clear as the Gansam Miksha, because where the Torah initially commanded us Miksha, it was clear to us that despite the fact that the Neres are not Miksha, the rest of the Neder has to be Miksha. So why would I all of a sudden think now that because they're separate, because the Neres are separate, everything else could be separate? In other words, the question, the mistake, it could be for someone that's learning deeper. On a Gemara level, you might make that association. But someone who's learning Pshat, it already told me Miksha in Parshas Teruma. Now it's telling me about the Neres. The Neres were separated. Big deal. It doesn't mean that the whole Menorah can be made of non-Miksha. So the whole mistake that an Erechaim is addressing is not really a Pshutish Shel Mikra kind of mistake. In addition to that, we have a whole other problem with Rashi. In other words, according to Rashi, why we can't use this shot. In the Pirush HaKosov Behaalosecha Taich Rashi Beferish, here Rashi doesn't accept the Taich of Behaalosecha like the Erechaim. Rashi says, Al Shem Sha'alav Oila, because a flame rises. Kosov Bad Lekosov Lashon Aliyah, therefore at kindling the menorah, the pasuk uses the term of raising up. Shetzarach Lahad Lekat Shtei Shalav Aseh Dimilad, you have to light the candle and the lamp until the flame rises up on its own. Zetman, as Rashi learned the Pirush in Behaalosecha Neres, Nitas me is Maila the Neres of the menorah. So we see that Rashi doesn't teach Behaalosecha to mean that you're lifting up the candles onto the menorah, even though he agrees that that might be how it was done, like we said before, but that's not how he teaches the word Behaalosecha. Because if he was saying that Behaalosecha means that you're picking up the candles, then there's no source to this concept of Achatei that you have to light it until the flame rises on its own. The pasuk read kipshuti v'gin lav. The pasuk, when it says Behaalosecha, is referring to the flame. Sha'alav oile, the flame rises. And in this pasuk, we didn't discuss the nedus. We didn't discuss the actual lamps that they were part of it. They weren't part of it. So that's so the whole explanation of the Orach Chaim is linked, is based on the fact that we're teaching, that the Orach Chaim teaches that Behaalosecha means to take the candles that are disconnected and put them onto the menorah. But according to Rashi, that Behaalosecha means something else, then I wouldn't have even made this mistake in the first place, and therefore there's no need to address it. So we're back to our original question from Sif Aleph. The pasuk is a Ma'aser Gemer Miksha. Why does the pasuk bring up Miksha here in this parsha? Okay. That's our first question. In Sif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to introduce another question. Why does the pasuk tell us that the candles have to face the menorah? The pasuk already tells us in Parshas Teruma that you should make 7 candles, 7 branches, and you should light the candles which will shine towards the center, towards the face. So we already know from Parshas Teruma that that is how it's meant to be done. So why does the Torah have to tell it to us over here? Again, Nochmer. The question goes a step further. Not only, as we'll see in a minute, do we have to light it in a way that it should face the center, but the candles themselves, the metal, the gold themselves, was fashioned in a way that would cause the flames to face the center. As Rashi says, explains in the Parshas Teruma on the words V'heyir al Ever Panah, also pi sheishes haneris sheberasha yakanim hayetze mitzideha, that he fashioned the tips of the 6 candles that were at the top of the branches, mesubim klape ha'emtzoi, leaning towards the center candle, k'dei sheyitiu haneris kishetadlikim meirim al Ever Panah. The way they shaped the actual lamp was that the tip of it was facing the center, so that way when you light the menorah, the fire will actually lean and face towards the center one. So if that's the case, if the way the menorah was fashioned was that the flames, that the tips were leaning in the direction of the center of the menorah, so that way the flame that comes out of them automatically faces the center. So how could you command now Aaron to light it in a way that it should face there? It's an automatic thing, that's an outcome from the way the menorah was fashioned. The candles, the menorah was made that way, as we were commanded in Parashas Teruma when the menorah was being made. So now that Aaron's being told to light the menorah, it doesn't have to be told specifically that to do it in a way that it should face the center. It's going to happen by itself. That's how the menorah was fashioned. So the second point that the Rebbe is asking, why would you tell us something that there's no need for a commandment because it happens by itself based on how the menorah is fashioned? That we could say Rashi addresses. It is Mefarish Yo'iru Shiva Saneris. Rashi explains here in Behaalosecha where it says the 7 candles should illuminate. Shisha shal sheishes hakanim, the 6 that were on the 6 branches. Shleisha mizrachim pein lemul emtzoi hapsilois shebohen, the 3 that were on the more east would face towards the center one, that the wicks that were in them would face the center. And the three on the west side, Roshi Apsiles, Lemula Emtsoi, the ends, the tips of the wicks would face the center. So says the Rebbe explains this Rashi. Der Fund was Rashi is Meshana Belzina da Apsiles, Rashi Apsiles. Nitivi Pirushi Parashas Truma Pisheishes Anedis. So here the Rashi adds the Psiles, that the wicks have to face in a certain direction, not just the tips of the actual candle, of the actual lamp. So from this, the Rebbe deduces his move on as dois abazun tzivitz Aaron, that there's an additional command to Aaron as nice of them was pishes and it is in addition to the fact that the actual lamps were facing the center. That if Aaron echmatas and the psilis, there's a mitzvah on Aaron to tilt the wicks, that they should lean in the direction of the center of the menorah. Was from them upon this it depends the fact that the neiros will shine in the direction of the center. So the Rebbe is explaining on our second question that we asked, that according to Parashas Truma, the actual menorah was fashioned in a way that the flame should face the center. So what's the commandment here in the first place? Not why does he have to tell it us again, but why is there even a need for a commandment if it's going to happen by itself? And the answer is that there's an additional commandment here. That not only should the lamps be made in that way, but also Aaron, when he lights the menorah, should tilt the wicks to the center, to the direction of the center. So that answers the question why we have to have it mentioned here again. But if that's the pshat here, then the words of the pasuk don't fit so nicely, because it says in the direction of the menorah, the 7 candles will illuminate, sort of sounding that it happens by itself. Since here there's a specific commandment to Aaron, a specific instruction to Aaron how to light the menorah, that he should face the wicks in that direction. Then it should the words, the verbiage should have been in a way that sounds like a commandment to Aaron. You should make these candles illuminate in the direction of the menorah. When it yoiru, as the neighbors own like, and it's not about the neighbors that they should illuminate. It's that Aaron should light it in the way that it illuminates. So, if you're going to tell me that the reason why we have to say it again is why we have to mention this tzivui again is because it's a new tzivui to Aaron, that he should set up the wicks in that way, or light the menorah in a way that the wicks are facing in this direction, then the words of the pasuk, word ya'iru, doesn't really fit grammatically so correctly. It should have said ta'ir or something like that, where it's clear that we're talking to Aaron, and it's about Aaron's lighting, kindling, and not about the neighbors in which direction they go. So we have 2 questions here. Now, question number 1 is, why does he bring up the concept of miksha here if we already know it from Parshas Teruma, when we were taught about the construction of the menorah? And the second question is, why bring up the ya'iru shiva saneres? And if the pshat is that there's a new tzivui to Aaron, a new commandment to Aaron, that he should set up the wicks in the way that the flames face the center, then why does it say ya'iru and not ta'ir or something like that? And now in Siv Daled, the Rebbe is going to begin the biur, and as a hakdama, as an introduction to the Rebbe's introduction, I will say as follows. The mitzvah of lighting the menorah, besides the mitzvah of constructing the menorah, which is a Parshas Teruma, the mitzvah of lighting the menorah is mentioned in 3 places. In Parshas Tetzaveh, V'ata Tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael v'yikro elecha shemen zayizach kasis lamoyer lahalis ner tamid, a pasuk that we are very, very familiar with. And then again in Parshas Emer, as we'll see in the Sicha, and then again in Parshas Behaalosecha. And the Rebbe is going to bring a machlekes Rashi and an Ramban as to what is the significance of each of these 3 instructions. And based on that, we'll understand will gain a brand new understanding into what Parshas Behaalosecha is all about, and will understand why it says Ya'iru and not Toyer. We'll understand why Miksha has to be introduced here, and why we don't rely just on Parshas Teruma, and everything is going to fall into place really, really beautifully. Is the Bir Bezeh Behektim. In the Parshas was Retzach V'Gen the Menera, in the Parshas where the Menera is discussed, which is Tetzava, Emer, and Behaalosecha, as I said, Kefint ben HaMachlokes v'Shen Rashi and Ramban, we find the Machlokes between Rashi and Ramban. In Parshas Emer, point number 1. In Parshas Emer, wo steht der Tzivui, v'yikhu elecha Hashem zay zach kases lamoyer, la'alis ner tamid, v'chutz lepareicha sa'edos be'oil meir yarech eisei arin, they should bring to you olive oil that was crushed for the moyer, for the luminary, to be able to kindle the ner tamid. It should be done outside of the pareiches in the oil moyed. Aaron will set it up. Zakt Rashi says, zu parshas mitzvahs haneros. This is where the mitzvah of lighting the menorah is. That's what Rashi says. Mitzvahs haneros is an emer. Parshas not the Tetzaveh. The fact that we already mentioned this in the Tetzaveh, leinemra ella al seder melechas hamishkan lefarach tzedek hamenorah, is only there as part of this, the construction of the Mishkan, to explain why the menorah is needed. So Tetzaveh is not where Aaron is commanded to light the menorah. That happens in Emer. In Tetzaveh, it's only mentioned because it wants to tell us why the menorah was even necessary. That's Rashi. The Ramban dort in Parshas Emer is Chelek of Rashi. The Ramban in Emer disagrees with Rashi. When learned, what is the necessity of this parsha of Emer if we already were told in Parshas Tetzaveh the mitzvah of lighting the menorah? And Shom be Parshas Tetzaveh oid loy omar elo yarich oisi Aaron uvanov. In Parshas Tetzaveh it says only that Aaron and his sons should organize it, should set it up. But it wasn't clear from over there that the candles of the menorah, that the lights of the menorah have to be on a menorah. Im tishaber oitevad, if the menorah was to break or to get ruined. And in Parshas Emer it says, on the pure menorah it should be kindled. That it must be on the actual menorah. That says later Rashi is Parshas Emer der Tziva in the Parshas Mitzvah. According to Rashi, in Parshas Emer is where is the parsha of the commandment of the kindling. Und later Rambam, das ahemshich und aprat in der mitzvah adlakas am neidish Parshas Tetzaveh. According to Rambam, it's only a supplemental detail to what was already commanded in Tetzaveh, as it darf sein dafka la menorah, that it must be on the menorah. So this is our first difference already. That according to Rashi, the main tzivui is the Parshas mitzvah haneros, it says Emer, and Tetzaveh is only there to explain to us why the menorah was even needed. Whereas, according to the Ramban, the main mitzvah is in Tetzaveh, and Emer is just adding a detail. Beis, B'tchilas Parshas Seinu is Rashi mefarish lama nisbech Parshas Amenera the Parshas Anasim. The beginning of Parshas Behaalosecha, Rashi says, why is the parsha of the menorah juxtaposed with the parsha of the Nesiim, which is at the end of Nase, all of the gifts that the Nesiim brought for the dedication of the Mishkan? Says Rashi, Lefisha Kishra Aaron Chanukas Nesiim, when Aaron saw what the Nesiim were bringing and how they were taking part in the dedication of the Mishkan, Aaron felt bad that he wasn't part of it. So Hashem tells him, I swear to you that your part is greater than their part, because you are the one who is preparing and kindling the lamps. The Ramban fragt auf Rashi. The Ramban has questions on Rashi. We had a sikh in Chelek Yudches, which will be brought up again in this sikha, which the Rebbe will reference later in this sikha, and over there in the sikha, the Rebbe mentioned, brings the questions of the Ramban, and ultimately has a very, very beautiful pshat, which is referenced in this sikha later, as to what was bothering Aaron and what the Eibishter answered to him. But the Ramban, because of his questions, learns different pshat. As Kishem vidi parsha in Emer is I sofa after parsha of Tetzaveh, just like Emer was a supplemental detail, as the adlakim was an eliminated dafka, that the adlaka, that the kindling of the menorah of the lamps has to be on a menorah. Al derech says the parsha. The Ramban uses the same approach in this parsha. That this parsha is teaching a new detail in the pre-existing mitzvah of lighting the menorah. Hishlim oid called dini aneres over here, since he's already done with talking about the erecting of the Mishkan, which happened in the end of Nasai. So now he completes some of the details in the dinim of the neres. But Tzivani commanded shivas aneres kulan dilkes lederes alupnei amenorah, that all of the 7 candles should face the center of the menorah, and this is lederes. It's for all generations. As he already mentioned in the construction of the menorah, that it should be done this way. So basically, he concludes that the Maisa menorah in Parshas Tetzaveh, in the section where the Mishkan was being built, he mentioned the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, and now he adds 2 details: loy bilti menorah, that in Emer he added that it can be without a menorah, and in Behaalosecha he adds loy bilti sheyiru kol menorah v'panah, and it can't be in a way that they're not facing the center of the menorah. And this is something that is for future generations as well. This is why in Behaalosecha it doesn't say in Parshas Emer. If, for example, it said michutz leparecha seidus ba'oil moyed yarech eisei aron, here it doesn't say the words ba'oil moyed. The Lamashia came a mikdash, because one of the things we're learning here is that it's the daitis, is because technically the fact that they're facing the center we know from Parshas Tetzaveh. So the chiddush of here is that it's the daitis, that it has to face the center of the menorah, but not just in the Mishkan, also in generations to come. So, according to this, here is the breakdown. This is the summary of this seif. In other words, we had the difference we said in Aleph, that in Parshas Emer, Rashi says that's the main mitzvah of lighting the menorah, and Tetzaveh is a side thing. And in and the Ramban says that the main thing is in Tetzaveh, and then in Behaalosecha, Rashi calls it Parshas HaMenorah, as we'll see in the Sikha, and the Ramban says it's just a detail. So now let's summarize this in the words of the Rebbe. Late Rashi and the Rabbi under the Parshas been against the menorah. Rashi says there's 3 separate sections. The Tziva b'reish Parshas Tetzaveh is atil from Tziva v'sedim melachas hamishkan for Parshas Teruma. The commandment in the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh is part of the order of the building of the Mishkan, which began in Teruma. The Parshas Emer is Parshas Mitzvos HaNeres. In Parshas Emer, the emphasis is the commandment of the candles, the kindling of the lamps. And our parsha is Parshas HaMenorah. If you're looking in Rashi or even in the text of the Sikha, in the beginning of Beis on the previous column, Rashi says Lama Nismecha Parshas HaMenorah, the Parshas HaNesiim. So the Rebbe is differentiating that Parshas Emer is Parshas HaNeros, and Parshas Behaalosecha is Parshas HaMenorah, which the Rebbe will elaborate on later what that means, what Parshas HaMenorah means exactly. But we see 3 things. There's Melechas HaMishkan, which is in Tetzaveh. Then you have Parshas HaNeros in Emer, and Parshas HaMenorah in Behaalosecha. Oberleit in the Ramban, in Parshas Tetzaveh, the Parshas of the mitzvah of Lakas Neris, Tetzaveh is where you have the mitzvah of lighting the candles. And the Tzivuyim of Parshas Emer, Parshas Seinu, and the commandments in Emer and in our Parsha of Behaalosecha, and Beida Pratim V'Ashlamis in the Din of Lakas Neris, are details and supplements to the dinim of lighting of kindling the lamps, as this darv zayin oif a menorah davke, that it has to be on a menorah, like it says in Parshas Emer al ha menorah hatahira, v'sheyiru alever panah, that it has to face the center of the menorah, which is mentioned in Behaalosecha. Al pi anal. So now that we understand that there's a different approach between Rashi and Ramban, kumt ois achilik zwischen Rashi and Ramban, euch bin gegeben pasuk v'zamayis hamenorah miksha. There will also, following this approach, there will also be a difference of opinion between Rashi and Ramban, how to understand the pasuk v'zamayis hamenorah. This is the way the menorah was constructed. Miksha, that it was hammered out of a piece of gold, as we'll see. Hadas Ramban. According to the Ramban, since he holds that the whole Behaalosecha is only a supplement to the main din of lighting the menorah, is Echter Siyum, the pasuk v'zemaisam neder miksha a prat unashlom in dinyan nedes. The Ramban will say this too is a supplemental detail. To live mekayim zay mitzvahs hanedes. Kashem v'dim adlaka darf zayin eva meneder davka nit b'lei meneder. Just like we said in Parshas Emer that it has to be on a meneder, not without a meneder. Darf does zayin eva meneder versus miksha. It has to be on a meneder that's miksha. Und eben nit does not akid the adlaka hanedes. And if not, then the mitzvah of lighting the candles would not be fulfilled. In other words, according to the Ramban, that anyway this is not the main mitzvah. So the fact that we're bringing up details that were already brought before is not such a major question. Late Pirish Rashi aber, was ruft on the Parsha Hamenorah canal. But according to Rashi, who, as we mentioned previously, is referring to Behaalosecha not as Parshas HaNedes, but as Parshas HaMenorah, it is the Parsha of the Menorah. Kum tuis, as the Iker b'Parshas Seinu, zeg Meis HaMenorah, dit adlakas HaNedes, welche wird gesagt in the Pasuk, v'zeh Meis HaMenorah miksha. The Rebbe is taking us now and shifting the way we understand Behaalosecha. And I know you're asking yourself, what about Behaalosecha HaNedes? We'll get to that. Let's take one step at a time. The Rebbe is telling us that Pshat according to Rashi, is that this parsha is about the menorah, not so much about the neders. We'll get to the neders in a moment. And that's why it says V'zeh Ma'isa Menorah, and that would mean that that's the main pasuk here. The main pasuk in this section of Behaalosecha is V'zeh Ma'isa Menorah. That's the Iker. So you're going to say, 1 second, I don't understand. How could you tell me that the Iker is the Miksha if we see clearly the pasuk before, the mitzvah that's being told is that to kindle the lamps in a way that they face the center of the menorah? Is der fun verstandig? So here is the shift. From this we have to understand as euch that Inyan from Elmul Pnei Menorah, that even the detail that the lamps have to face the center of the menorah is negea nita to them kiyum is alakas neiris is relevant not just or not so much to the mitzvah of the kindling, nor to the etzem gufa menorah. The fact that the menorah that the lamps are and the flames are facing the center of the menorah is actually part of the construction of the menorah, or are actually part of the essence of the menorah. What's pshat? You have the building of the menorah, fine, I understand. You can shape the lamps in a certain way. But then when it comes to actually kindling, it's part of the kindling. So the Rebbe is going to explain to us in Sivav what he means. What's pshat? That the fact that Aaron is kindling the menorah in a way that it's facing the center is actually a detail in the actual menorah and not just a detail in the kindling of the menorah. The Rebbe is going to explain this in Sivav. The Asbari in them. In die Psukim in Parshas Truma, wo es wird gerät wegen Amaisa Menorah, steht, was ist Menorah so auf teuer, Miksha Teyasa Menorah, Yerecha, Vekana, Gviyah, Kaftireo, Pracha, Mimena Yehu. In Parshas Truma, it says you should make a menorah out of pure gold. It should be hammered, the base, the main branch, the goblets, the buttons, the flowers, which should all come from it. It should all be hammered out from the same piece. The Nach steht in Pasuk. So this first Pasuk is all talking about the main center branch of the menorah. That the entire thing should be made miksha. The Nach steht in Pasuk. There were 6 branches. 3 on one side. 3 on the other side. Kumtois. From the way this is laid out in the psukim, as it seems to imply as al pivas the ganze menorah is going mixer achazav, even though the entire menorah, including the 6 branches, were all hammered out of one piece of gold. There's still a difference between the actual main branch of the menorah and the other 6 branches. In the center branch of the menorah, you did not see that it was made up of separate parts. So it was clear that it was one thing. Whereas the 6 branches, Chach Asiyasam is given from themselves an Eshes Zav, even though they were made from the same chunk of gold. But after the Meneda was made, it wasn't so obvious that this is the same thing. It looks like it could have been screwed in. It looked like it could have been made as a separate piece and then soldered together. It wasn't clear. In other words, you call them branches, it's like limbs of something that were attached. So even though it was all one miksha, it's not so clear that it's one piece. So what person walks into the Beis Hamikdash and sees the menorah, what he sees, what might seem to him, is a center branch, and then 6 additional branches, 6 additional limbs that are part of this menorah that may not be one with a main part. Shas aber Aaron is mekayim Behaalosecha sanedis el mul pnei menorah yishuv sanedis. But if Aaron fulfills the mitzvah of kindling the lamps in a way that the flames face the center, is durch dem was alle sheishes sanedis leichten op pnei menorah, since all the 6 lamps are shining towards the center. Now it becomes clear that we're not just talking about one menorah. No, the it shows that all of the other 6 lamps are actually part of the one menorah. By facing their flames to the center, they are connecting themselves, in a sense, to the center of the menorah, and it becomes even more clear that this is one entity. So from this, it's understood as afal pibas bepelas that see we done against the Maisa Adlaka von Aaron, even though the commandment is to Aaron's kindling, the Pu'ula von Aaron in the Psilis, and how Aaron has to set up the wicks. We're not talking here about the actual fashioning of the menorah, that the tips of the lamps should face the center. But we are talking about the commandment to Aaron, how Aaron lights the menorah, that the wick should face the center, as Rashi says. But the reason for it, the theme of it, the purpose of it, is actually part of the construction of the menorah. In other words, the commandment to Aaron is to kindle the menorah in this way. But what is the accomplishment of it is that the guf ha-menorah should be seen as one thing. So in Parshas Truma we were told to build the menorah. Miksha. In Parshas Behaalosecha we're telling Aaron that when you kindle the menorah, it should be done in a way that it is clear that the entire menorah is one thing. Not just one thing, but that all of the other branches are part of the main branch. And that's why Rashi calls it Parshas HaMenorah. We'll see it more weiter. But because this parsha is not so much about the mitzvah of the kindling, it's about the actual menorah, that the menorah should be one menorah. Und der Pfarrer steht nicht in Pasuk der Lashon Toyer Shiva Saneres. That's why he doesn't use the word Toyer. Besignet shall Sivit Sa'arin in a style that would imply a commandment to Aaron. No, your Iru Shiva Saneres, that they will illuminate. While the lamps will illuminate. While they're taking the gedef and amul pnei menorah is nit naratinu mitzvah in the ma'asad loka shala gavra. Because as we just explained, this fact that Aaron is commanded to light the menorah, to kindle the menorah in a way that the lamps and the flames face the center, is not just a detail in the kindling of the menorah, it's a part of the actual menorah itself, and therefore if it said ta'ir, that would be talking to Aaron. And although it is a commandment to Aaron, but the point is that the ya'iru shiva saneres, that the neres as they're part of the menorah should illuminate in the way that they are seen as part of the menorah, and therefore takes away the emphasis on Aaron, doesn't say Toyer, because it's not so much about the Gavra as much as it is about the Chefza. So this is the Rebbe's pshat in what's happening in Rashi, in what's happening in Behaalosecha. In Parshas Emor, there was a mitzvah on Aaron to kindle the lamps of the menorah. Mitzvahs haneros is in Emor. In Parshas Behaalosecha, the Torah is telling us the mitzvah of the menorah, that when we kindle the menorah, it has to be done in a way that it becomes obvious that it's one menorah. And that's why he says, Amul Pnei menorah here. And that's why he says Yo'iru and not Toir. And to emphasize this detail, that the kindling of the lamps in a way that they face the center of the menorah is part of Parshas Menorahs, niet from Parshas Mitzvahs Hanedes, not part of the kindling of the lamps, but a part of kindling or of the making of the menorah. Is there pasuk meisiv da? That's why the pasuk actually adds here. This is the construction of the menorah. Miksha zav, that it was hammered from gold. The entire thing was miksha. Additionally, der pasuk rechnet on nito is bezunder di menorah. Gufa shel menorah medikanim gvim kaftedim uprachim parshas truma. The pasuk does not list the various different parts or designs on the menorah. There ain't klolos dikin lashon ha menorah ad pircha. He talks to them about the menorah as one thing, because he wants to emphasize that the purpose of a mulpnei menorah is to emphasize the oneness of the menorah, and therefore he brings them as a ma'isa menorah mikshazav, that we're talking about the menorah, not just the neiros, and therefore the way he talks about it is as one menorah without going into the various different parts. V'yesh leimar. When Rashi talks about the menorah, here he says the entire menorah and everything that is part of it. Because here it's not just telling us that the menorah has to be miksha, it has to be hammered. In the Oifen Asiya in Parshas Truma, that how was it made? It was made in a hammered, in a way that it was chiseled out of one piece of gold. Nor the alts is a chelik from the gufa menorah. The emphasis here is not just how to structure it, but when you have a finished product, it should be represented that it's all part of the same menorah. And therefore Rashi says the words gufa shel menorah v'chalatoliba, that everything that's in the menorah is all part of the gufa shel menorah, the essence of the menorah. So the fizeh, once we understand that the way Rashi explains the three different parshias, that the tzava is said sort of as an aside, as part of the building of the Mishkan, and the Parshas Emer is the mitzvah of kindling the candles, mitzvahs haneros, and Parshas Behaalosecha is mitzvahs hamenorah. So even the fact that Aaron is being told to light the candles in a way that they face the center, that's part of the Maisa menorah, to represent the fact that every part of the menorah is all one with the menorah. Now we understand what Parshas Behaalosecha is telling us, and why it says V'zeh Maisa menorah miksha, which was our first question in the Sikha, because it wants to emphasize the fact that we're talking about the menorah and the oneness of the menorah. We also understand why it says again al mul pnei menorah yishivas haneros, because we want to tell Aaron this new commandment that he should do it in a way that should emphasize the oneness of the menorah. In Siv Zayin, the Rebbe has one final question. Rashi betchilas a parsha firtuis as the rufus cholsho as daite shel Aaron kshloi ha'yimoim b'chanukah lehuva le'shiftei. The fact that Aaron felt bad that not he nor anybody from his shevet was part of the Nesiim when it came to the dedication of the Mishkan. So Hashem consoled him by telling him that he's the one who's going to prepare and kindle the lamps. Which would mean that the main point here is about the kindling of the lamps. So how does that fit? How is that consistent with what we just explained in the Sikha, that the main thrust of this parsha Behaalosecha is not so much the kindling of the lamps, but the menorah itself, is the beer in them. So here's the explanation, and for this we're going to go back to the Sikha in Chelek Yud Ches. Shengeret Amol Barucha, as Dibur Hashem, Chayecha Shel Chag Gdelim Mishalem, that the words of Hashem, where He said, "I swear to you that yours is greater than theirs," Sha'atam Madlik U'Meitiv Haneros, that you are the one who kindles and prepares the candles, Nitnar Di Adlokas Haneros V'Anak Shalatzma, is not just referring to the kindling of the lamps by Aaron. Unas das is gresser with the Chanukas Amizbeach from the Nesiim, and that's greater than the dedication of the Mizbeach by the Nesiim. In other words, over there, the Rebbe had a bunch of questions. For example, why is Menorah greater than what Aaron is doing? Why is Menorah greater than the Nesiim? And if it is, why did Aaron feel bad? Like the Rebbe asks these very basic questions in the Sikh and Chelek Ches, and the Rebbe answers like this: "Nor semeint ados as atom madlik umetiv as anedes is a gather from Chanukah samaneda." The Rebbe teaches of it Chelek Ches that when Hashem tells Aaron that he's the one that's lighting the menorah, that's kindling the menorah, that is how he is dedicating the menorah. The Rebbe says that the Rebbe asks over there that Moshe Rabbeinu also did it before Aaron. So, what does it mean? The Rebbe explains when Moshe did it, it was just part of a preparation. When Aaron did it, that was the actual Chanukah, the actual dedication of the menorah. In the alle 12 tag was the Nisim gebracht der Kabbalas Chanukah Mizbeach, and all of the 12 days in the beginning of the month of Nisan, when the Nisim were bringing their karbanos to dedicate the Mizbeach, is the alle 12 tag Aaron madlik umetiv aneris. In all of these 12 days, Aaron is the one that prepares and kindles the lamps. But that's a gedef for Chanukah Menorah, which is part of dedicating the Menorah. When the Shachal gedeles and kam v'kam prating before us, and based on this, the Rebbe says over there why Aaron is greater. For example, Aaron did it himself, whereas the Nisim didn't actually bring the things on the Mizbeach, and the natives were inside the Mishkan. The Mizbeach is outside of the Mishkan. And Madlik Umetiv, Aaron did everything by himself, and he did all the details, whereas the Nisim didn't get to do all the details. So once you understand that it's a Chanukah versus a Chanukah, that the Nisim were dedicating the Mizbeach, and Aaron was dedicating the Menorah, it is understood why Aaron now feels better, why it was a consolation to him that Aaron is the one, because he's also doing the Chanukah, he's also part of the dedication. But now that we understand from Chelek Ches, from the Rebbe Sich over there, that what Aaron was doing wasn't just lighting, wasn't just kindling flames, but he was actually taking part in the Chanukah, in the dedication of the Menorah. Then now answer our question. When Ikri v'teichen v'nina Chanukah is nita zoy di apulus aveda di akrava v'adlaka shel hagavra. When you talk about dedicating something, it's not about a specific act that's being done by the person. The dedication of the Menorah is the culmination of its creation and the entry of the holiness into it. Which makes it possible to be able to continue to do the avodah with this menorah, to properly kindle and prepare the menorah. So what we learned from Chelek Ches is even the kindling. Is also not just about the kindling, but it's about a bigger thing, about the actual essence of the menorah. And therefore, it turns out that based on the way the Rebbe ties Rashi, Behaalosecha is Parshas HaMenorah. It's all about the menorah. It's about the Chanukah of the menorah that Aaron did in the 12 days of the Chanukah Samishkan. And it's telling us that the Aaron, when he lights the menorah, he should light it in a way that the flames face the center, to emphasize the oneness of the menorah, and to emphasize to us that we're talking about the oneness of the menorah. The Torah says, "V'zem ma'isa menorah miksha," to remind us that this parsha is all about the oneness of the menorah. And that's why he doesn't mention the details of the various different ornaments or parts of the menorah. And that's what Rashi says, "Kul menorah kula v'chalatoliba," all about the menorah and its oneness. Now, all parts of it is all one thing, one guf ha-menorah. The Rebbe is going to take us onto the deeper level. The neshama werd angerufen nekmen zu kassen in der weinisch besadam. As close neshama Yisrael werden angerufen menorah, was in the menorah zayin dos shiva nedes, was zayin disibin madreges menorah Hashem. The menorah refers to Klal Yisrael that consists of many neshamas. Each one is its own ner, and in general there are 7 neres, referring to 7 levels in serving Hashem. In them so in Klal Yisrael, and the fact that there's various different ways of serving Hashem, there's 2 elements. Neshamas as they are in their sores, which they are all the same, and they have one Father. They are all integrated and they are all one. Till they become one entity. That's one thing. That in the source, Neshamas Yisrael become one thing. But after that, when every neshama is drawn from its source, every single yid becomes his own independent entity. Separate from the other. Every single yid has his own unique qualities. And based on his unique qualities is the shlichus that he was given in this world to serve Hashem. Und das sind these two ideas, the oneness of Yidden, and then the subdivision into various different unique elements, is seen in the Menorah. On the one hand, when we talk about the construction of the Menorah, that it was made hammered out of one piece, this shows on the unity and the oneness of Yidden as they are in their source. It's one chunk of gold. They stand in total oneness without identifying various different levels amongst them. On the other hand, but then they become subdivided into 7 different branches. 7 different ways, approaches in serving Hashem. Now the pasuk tells us the avodah of a yid is to fuse together the oneness of the yid and the differences that exist amongst us. How should every single yid light his own candle? How should every single yid do his own personal aveda? Has to be in a way that everything faces the center. It should be obvious. It should be recognizable that everybody's individual, every person's individual aveda is not his own journey, not his own thing. Nor is the alles eine verbunden. All the different unique avedas are all connected. Yadrin is nikir as ikir of a techna for the aveda prat designer is the nekuda klolos from anine vreis the shamas as keni, that within the unique aveda of every single yid there is the underlying theme, the underlying factor. That it's all about serving Hashem, which that is equally existent in every single Aveda. In other words, you have person A and person B are doing 2 different Avedas, but beneath the surface, both of them are motivated by Anin Nevreis and the Shamash Eskoni, that they're serving Hashem. So on the one hand, there is a uniting factor. On the other hand, there is a dividing factor or a subdivided factor, and the Aveda is that in the unique Aveda of every single Yid, it should be obvious the fact that they're all working for the same goal. And in this itself, the fusion of the individuality of each person, as it fuses together with the oneness of Klal Yisrael, there's 2 approaches in how to go about this. Is the oneness a detail in the kindling of the menorah of the lamps, Ramban, or the fakert as al mul pnei menorah is given a master in the menorah, or do we look at the other way, that the kindling of each aveda is the culmination and the completion of the oneness of the menorah? Okay. In other words, if you break down what the Ramban is saying, the Ramban is saying there was a mitzvah of kindling, and here as a detail in that, it has to be one menorah, miksha. The way that Rashi says it is that the whole purpose of the kindling is to highlight the miksha, to highlight the oneness. So in Avodah, we're going to see these 2 approaches. In the Pula von Aaron, in Neshamas Yisrael, so when Aaron has an impact on Neshamas Yisrael, Behaalosecha Aaron is kindling the lamps of a Yid. There's a basic level, and then there's a deeper level, a more goal, focusing more on the goal here. Rashi, whose approach is the basic understanding, is Mefardish Pulas Arif and Behaalosecha Kipshuta. Rashi goes with the simplest way. As a pale by Neshamas Yisrael as Yadav Friyas Baaliyah, that Aaron affects the Neshamas Yisrael to elevate them. To be drawn to its source. As we've discussed many times, the level of Aaron is he is the accompaniment of the bride, which means he is the one that's bringing the bride, Yidden, Klal Yisrael, to Hashem. But says he is elevating the Neshamas to their source. Where in the source, they are on the level of oneness. Kumtois, as the Pula Sadloke is Techana Dialot Bechinas Miksha. The purpose of the kindling, according to Rashi, according to the more basic approach, is to elevate them to the level of Miksha. The fire learned Rashi is that Ikar in your person is Parshas Samaneda, my Samaneda. Therefore, Rashi learns that the primary message here is the oneness of the menorah. When the Adlaka Samaneda, even from the Mulpnei Menorah, is a Chelek v'Miksha, and the kindling of the menorah, that they should all face, all the candles, all the lamps, all the flames should face the center, is part of Miksha. This is Mashlim, the Achtos of Miksha, my Samaneda. It completes the Achtos where you see how everything is facing the center. So that's the basic approach. That Aaron is elevating the Yidden to Miksha. Aaron lights the candles in a way of Miksha. Aaron elevates the Yidden to bring them to Miksha. The Ramban, the Ramban, whose Pirush is not just simple understanding. Pleasant ideas to those who know the secrets. Say the Satire, the Ramban is deeper into the esoteric. Is Zain Pirush with the Pnimishum Torah and Allah and the Ramban's Pirush is more consistent with the ultimate purpose of the kindling of the lights. They're tachlis when they're lost neshamas Yisrael. What's the purpose of elevating the neshamas? Which is what Rashi is talking about. Is to accomplish a dwelling place for Hashem in the lower worlds. And more specifically, in the lowest of all worlds, in the place where there's a Reshus HaRabim, which is explained in Chassidus to mean a public domain, a domain where the oneness of Hashem is not obvious, and the goal is to highlight the oneness of Hashem. Is der fünf verstandig, as the Tachlis von Miksha, the Achtus von Yidden, that ultimately the whole purpose of the oneness of Yidden as they are in their source is to mamshach then the Achtus in the Ort with den Shamas so stehen bis Chalkus is even besondere Nedes, besondere Fane Avedes, to draw down that oneness into the space where the Yidden are seen as separate entities, separate lamps, separate approaches in serving Hashem. As that they're too to draw down the achtos that is so obvious in their source, and when they come down into this world, it's not so obvious. In them which is expressed in the fact that the lamps face the center of the menorah. According to Rashi, the Aaron's purpose is to elevate the Jewish people. According to the Ramban, which is focusing on the deeper element of it, the purpose of elevating the Jewish people to their source is to bring them back down here to be able to draw down that oneness into a space which lacks oneness. So according to the way Rashi approach in the Pnimis Yanim, the Elmul Pnei Ameneda is for the Miksha. And according to the Ramban, the Miksha is for the Elmul Pnei Ameneda. The oneness is so that in the place where there's a lack of oneness, to be able to bring the Achtos. According to the Ramban, the main thing here is the kindling. But in order for the kindling to be, which means the kindling is the work that's being done in this world, that's the main emphasis here. It's just that in order for it to be kindled properly, you have to recognize the miksha, the oneness of miksha. So we thought that's something that's coming from the neshama. But what's the main thrust of this parsha? The kindling. Whereas according to Rashi, the main thrust of the parsha is the menorah, because al derech pshat, the pshat within Pnimis Yanim is the idea of elevating Yidden to their source, to a place of Achdus. So now this approach of Rashi and Ramban draws down into the Aveda of the person, where Rashi is focusing more on the oneness of the menorah, on the source of Yidden, and Ramban is focusing more on the Aveda of the Yidden, which is the kindling of the menorah.